Chasing Contentment, Discovering Jesus' Strategy for Your Stuff. I'm thrilled to be jumping into this series, and I want to let you know a couple of things before we get started. One is, you're going to find this series challenging. I mean, buckle up. Jesus has some challenging stuff to say. And when it comes to our stuff and our possessions, and also the money that we buy them with. Now, if you're joining us today, you might be saying, hey, maybe it's your first time. You're saying, exactly what I thought. My first day, and the pastor's already asking about money. He's already talking about money. This guy just wants my money. I want to let you know that when it comes to talking about finances, there's two reasons we do it. One is because you're talking about it. What money you have, what stuff you can buy, what you can afford, what you can't afford. It's something you're having a conversation about every single day. But also, this is something that we want for you, what we share in this series. We want you to be able to find contentment. You're going to be hearing about the financial learning experience over the course of these series. That's something that we provide to help you in the area of finances and management of the things that you own. This is something that we want to see in your life we think can radically change things for you. So excited to be jumping into this series wherever you're at. I know for some of you, the pandemic has been difficult financially. And for some of you, you have more income and more possessions or more opportunity to get possessions than you've ever had before. But I think Jesus is going to speak to you right where you're at. See, there's no doubt we live in a consumption-based society. We live in a consumer society. I mean, you just think about it. You go to work during the day, or maybe you go to work in the basement, or you're taking care of the kids in the backyard, and at the end of the day, you open the front door only to find a package or 2 or 3 that have been delivered to your house, and you're not even sure what's inside of the packages some of the time. I mean, that's really the epitome of a consumer-based society, isn't it? Or when things are open and we have the ability to go to the mall, and I say, hey, what did you do on Saturday? And people go, well, I went shopping. Well, what did you go shopping for? Well, I didn't really go shopping for anything specific. I'll know what I need when I see it. You walk around Canadian Tire or Home Depot or the mall just looking for things that you might want to buy. That's a consumer society. You know that 1-800-GOT-JUNK, this is all the stuff we throw out, makes $1 million a day. 10% of Canadians own some sort of storage unit. And self-storage in the US has quadrupled over the last 5 years. I mean, consumption in stuff is such a big part of our culture. Now, I remember when I was first introduced to the consumption cycle. I was first introduced to the desire to have a thing, to possess something. And it comes to us all very young, doesn't it? I was 12 years old, and I loved sports. I loved any kind of sport. And what would happen because I loved so many sports is that I would wear out my running shoes all the time. I'd wear them out, I'd grow out of them, and every time I did, my mom would take me up the street to Stedman's department store in our little town, and she would buy me another pair of Sparks running shoes. Now, when I was young, Sparks was cool because it was spelled S-P-A-R-X, and I love my Sparks running shoes. And my mom loved them because she wasn't willing to spend more than $20 on a pair of shoes. But what happened when I hit 12 years old is I love basketball, and it was the very beginning of professional athletes, in particular NBA players, having sneaker contracts. Not like today where LeBron has a new pair every week, but they would have maybe one pair during their whole career. And there are these pair of shoes called Nike Flights that Michael Jordan had, and I thought, man, I would love to get my hands on these shoes. So what I did was I realized I need to make some money. So I decided I would pick strawberries. And I picked strawberries at $2 a basket. And I didn't make very much money because I ate more strawberries than I actually got in the basket. So I was making like $4 a day at 12 years old. So then I got a job at a hobby farm. An older gentleman owned a hobby farm, and he would hire me for 3 hours a day to help with chickens, cut grass, raise guinea pigs. I mean, we did all kinds of things. And one of the things he actually had me do was something I'd never done before. At 12 years old, he said to you, over there, if you get looking in the grass, there's the head of a moose. I said, a head of a moose? He said, a moose died jumping the fence in the bush in the back of our forest this past year. And somebody took the meat, and what I want to do is skin the moose head so the antlers, the big antlers, are still on the skull. Now, I'd never hunted, I'd never skinned a moose head, I'd never skinned anything but my knee, but I wanted the money for these shoes. And I would soak this moose head every day in this big tub. Every second day I'd change it. I mean, it was stinky, it was full of maggots. I mean, it was just disgusting. Then I would build a fire, I would boil it over the fire, and I would work on this every single day. I honestly had no idea what I was doing. But when I looked at that disgusting moose head, I could see my shoes. I could see my Nike Flights. I could see them. They're $119.99, and I was going to get my hands on them. And at $2.25 an hour, I eventually that summer made the money to buy my Nike Flights. And I bought them, and I was so excited, and I got them home. I wore them to school, and this is what I learned. I learned that if I had cool shoes, I started to feel cool, and people started to think, hey, I like this guy. Look at his shoes. I started to kind of get some attention. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just the shoes at Stedman's department store that weren't good enough for me. The jeans weren't good enough, and the t-shirts weren't good enough. Next thing you know, throughout my time in high school, I'm getting job after job, and I'm spending it all at the mall, just upgrading my wardrobe. My dad, at one point, I remember walking through the door, hitting all my shoes as he comes in. He says, how many pairs of shoes does one teenage boy need? I was caught early on in the consumption cycle. Now, we all live in a consumption cycle, and this is how I describe it. It's I got one, I bought one, I invested in one, and a found one. This is what I mean by this, okay? So let's say you're 20, you're going to college, and you're getting an apartment, and you need a couch. And so you need to get one. So your aunt has an old couch, your grandma has an old couch, your parents have an old couch in the basement. It's got a hole in it, it's got coffee spilt on it. You don't care, you got one. You just need a couch, so you got one. Then as you get a little bit older, maybe you decide to set up your own apartment, you've got a job, or maybe you get married and you decide, hey, that couch is a little bit too ratty for us. Instead of just looking to get one, you move from got one to bought one. You go to IKEA, you go pick up the couch that you want, you say, hey, we're gonna buy this couch or that couch, and you bring it home and you have this IKEA couch and you have it for a while, and then you have kids, and then the kids are trashing that couch. And then you say to yourself, man, we really need to upgrade to another couch. And so then you start looking at different furniture stores, and you spend 3 times as much you spend on the IKEA couch, but you say to yourself, well, it's an investment. I'm investing in one. I got one, I bought one, now I'm investing in one. This is gonna last us for the long haul. And then as you get older, you become an empty nester, and there's no kids at home, and so you've got some disposable income maybe. And now you're not just investing in the next couch, you're researching it. You're finding the very best couch you can find, and you're looking for the one. And marketers continue to feed that consumption cycle to us. It's the same with vehicles. There's the old car my grandfather gave me when it was 12 years old, when I got out of university. And then you get a secondhand one, you get a used one, you get a new one. You want the one with Apple CarPlay, and then you want the one. And they continue to market and market and market to that consumption cycle. And you've got phrases that you use all the time when you buy stuff. Justification phrases. It's like, I deserve it, or it's on sale, or, well, I can afford the payments, so I must be able to afford it, or, you know, we'll do the renovation because we'll get it out of the house when we sell the house. Now, to the point that's true, but at a certain point it's not. I can't tell you how many contractors or salespeople have said to me, well, you'll get it out of the house on the other side. Well, at a certain point you will, at a certain point you won't. Or it's just money, I can make more. We've got all kinds of phrases that help feed the cycle. The cycle of consumption is one of the ways we chase contentment. If I get the next thing, I'll feel better. If I get the next thing, I'll feel better. And you know what? We do. We do for a moment when we buy these things feel better, feel satisfied until we don't. Until a better thing comes out, till there's a better house, till there's a better car, till there's a better phone. And all of a sudden, the dissatisfaction begins to creep in. Here's the problem with a consumption-based life. A consumption-based life leaves you consumed. That a consumption-based life is often what leads to workaholism. A consumption-based life is what leads to us over-leveraging ourselves in debt to buy things, only to experience all of that anxiety in our lives. A consumption-based life leaves you continually unhappy because you want the next thing. A consumption-based life leaves you consumed because it consumes your marriage, because you're trying to convince her or convince him to buy that thing, to rent that thing, to invest in that cottage, to whatever it might be. The consumption-based life can leave you consumed. So how do you break the cycle? How do you break the cycle of consumption? And I want to share with you why this is so important. Because it's not just important for your own contentment. It's not just important that you understand this consumer cycle we live in and hear what Jesus has to say about it for yourself. But if you've got kids, what about your kids? You know they're in it. You know they experience it. And you know they're going to experience it more and more and more. How do you model for them? How do you help them understand? How do you free them from the consumption-based cycle? And how do you help them find contentment? Now, Jesus talks about this a lot, and he's pretty tough on it. It's pretty challenging. And we're going to jump into that, and I want you to listen to what Jesus has to say. We're going to be looking at Matthew 6 today, and this is what he says. He says, don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them and where thieves break in and steal. What's he saying? He's saying, hey, don't store up all kinds of treasures. Don't store up all kinds of possessions that at the end of the day are going to deteriorate. At the end of the day are going to break down. At the end of the day are going to need to be replaced or upgraded. Don't make those things your treasure. But he says, store your treasures in heaven, where moss and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. What's Jesus saying here? Is he saying that you can't have things? He's saying that I can't have nice things? Is that what Jesus is saying? Well, you can have things. It's not that you can't have things, but he's warning against the desire to acquire. He's warning against, hey, what happens when your possessions and your money start to own you? What happens when it's all about the next thing, that desire to consume? In fact, what he's arguing with us is instead of upgrading, instead of acquiring, instead of needing more, what he's arguing is you need to have a change in your priorities. You need to invest not just what's in temporary, invest in what's eternal. You know, those Nike flights that I got, it was so much hard work to get those NBA shoes, those basketball shoes, that I held on to them till 2 years ago. And I found them in the bottom of a box, and you know what happened to them? The soles were like dust. They were destroyed. They went into garbage no matter how long I tried to preserve them, like anything else. Jesus is saying you need to focus your priorities on the things that matter most. You need to focus your priority not just on the temporary, focus on the things that are eternal. Focus on the things that multiply beyond you. Focus on the legacy of your life. Focus on a relationship with me that lasts into eternity. So how do you do that? How do you focus your priorities on the things that really matter? This is what he says. He tells us, he says, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. He says, you want to focus, instead of focusing on what's temporary and what eventually will rust or destroy or need to be replaced, and all of the anxiety you have in chasing that, or the anxiety you have around your debt to possess those things, or the workaholism that you have, or the feeling that you never have enough, you want to change that. You want to change that priority to the things that matter. He says, wherever your treasure is, there your heart will also be. The more you feed your appetite to possess temporary things, the more you're going to prioritize them. That's what he knows. The more you feed your appetite to possess, to add it to your cart, oh, look, people who bought this also bought that. People who bought this also bought that. The more you feed your appetite to buy the next thing, to shop online more and more and more, to get these temporary things, the more you're going to end up prioritizing. See, what Jesus knows is your treasure is the steering wheel for your heart. Your treasure is the steering wheel for your heart. He's saying, if you want to change your priorities to the things that matter the most, the things that echo into eternity, the things that don't rust and don't destroy, that will live long beyond you, he says, that's where you want to invest your treasure. Another way to put it is your money is the steering wheel for your heart. Your heart will follow your money. Choose to put it in the right places, in the things that matter into eternity. I don't know if you've when you had young kids, or if you have young kids now, or maybe you will, but let me tell you something that happens. At a certain point, your child, like one of my kids, asks to bring something that you really value to school for show and tell. Or they say, hey, I want to bring my laptop to school for the day. And you know how much you spent on that. And you spend the day wondering, what's going to happen to that thing they took to school? Like, is it going to come back in one piece? I mean, will we even get the laptop back? Or your teenager takes the car for the first time. And maybe your car is your treasure, but your teenager is even more your treasure. And you know that wherever your treasure goes, your heart's going to be also. What Jesus is saying is, if you want to change the priorities to the things that matter the most, figure out what they are and put your money there. So you say, okay, I got it, Jesus. I'm going to give my money to things that are eternal. and things that will kind of keep me balanced so I'm not all about consuming. I mean, that's it, right? And here's the thing. Jesus takes it now to the next level. It actually gets so much bigger than that. It's not just about balancing things out. This is what he says. He says, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. Now, what's he talking about? Now he's talking about, you're talking about treasures. Now you're talking about eyes. Like, what does all this mean? So in the Jewish culture, a lot of people thought that your eyes were like a light to your soul. That probably makes sense to you, right? And so if you had what they would call a good eye, you were the kind of person who saw the world through a lens of generosity. That when you looked at the world around you, you saw how God was generous to you, and you in turn were generous to other people. You realize how God had blessed you, and so you wanted to bless other people. And they would say, oh, you have a good eye. You have light in your eyes. But if you had an eye that was bad or that was dark, you're the kind of person who was envious of other people. That you weren't generous because you were always accumulating. That you never had enough. See, what Jesus is pointing out is the pursuit of possessions and money can cloud your vision about what's really important. The pursuit of money and possessions can give you a dark eye, can give you dark eyes, where you start to compare and you start to envy other people, and you start to look at what they have and what your neighbor bought and what that person has. Or you start to say, hey, I'm actually not going to be generous. I'm not going to tell anybody, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep more for myself, or I'm going to try to accumulate more. Oh, I always feel like I never have enough, that it doesn't satisfy me, that God isn't enough to satisfy me, that I need to have money, wealth, possessions to satisfy. How you see the world, in some ways what Jesus is saying, is how you end up managing your money and your stuff. And then he says this thing that's even more challenging. Like, as much as I'm like, Jesus, man, you're already hitting me on this stuff. This is what he says next. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. What's he saying? He's saying, hey, if you see yourself as a Christian, you see yourself as a follower of me, you see yourself as the kind of person who's generous, but really you're not, or you tell people that you're generous, but really you're not, he says that's a dangerous place to be. That self-deception is the darkest place of all. And then he explains why. This is what he says. He says, no one, can serve two masters, he explains. He says, you can't have a dark eye and a light eye. He says, no one can serve two masters, for you'll hate one and love the other. You'll be devoted to one and you'll despise the other. I don't know if you've ever had a job where you had two bosses. I worked at a day camp where it was a husband-wife. They said, well, we're both the boss. Well, both the boss meant two bosses, and one really was easy to get along with, and one was really difficult. At the end of the day, we realized you can't please two bosses. And that's what Jesus is saying. In fact, this is what he says next. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money at the same time. You can't serve God and be enslaved to money. And money here, the reason he uses the word enslaved is because money here could actually be translated mammon. Now, mammon was the god, really an idol, a god of wealth and money and possessions. Another god that you might trust in to give you wealth. Now, I think actually when I was looking at this is the only other spot I can find in the New Testament that I can think of where Jesus actually calls out a specific other god. And he says, you can't serve mammon and me. You can't look to the idol of wealth and money and possessions and me. Now, why is Jesus keying in on this so much? Because Jesus knows your money and your possessions are the number one competition for your heart. See, Jesus doesn't need your money. He doesn't need your possessions. He doesn't need you to invest in things that matter into eternity. He doesn't necessarily need you to do that. He doesn't need the money, but he wants you to, because he wants to have a relationship with you. He died on the cross for you. He wants you to know the satisfaction that comes from him. And he knows that as long as we have two eyes, dark and light, that as long as we have two masters, it's just not going to work. See, Jesus is saying, listen, here's option A. Option A is this: you serve the God who doesn't know you, the God of money or wealth or possessions. Serve the God who doesn't know you, who creates anxiety and over-leveraging yourself and an unending desire to be satisfied and to upgrade and do the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Or option B, trust in Jesus, who knows you, who died for you, who will provide for you, who truly satisfies you, who gives you true contentment. And then what Jesus says is, we don't have time to look at it today, but he says, listen, I'm enough. I'm enough for you. And he says, don't worry about possessions and finances. He says, look at the birds. They're not worried. They know God's going to provide. He says, look at the lilies. They're not worried. They know God's going to provide. He says, find your true contentment in me. Trust in the fact that I'm enough. I mean, that's really what this is about. It's trusting in the fact that no matter what you have or don't have, that Jesus is enough. And the way to prioritize him, the way to put him first, is to know that wherever you put your treasure, that's where your heart's going to go. Then he says this. He boils it down really to one sentence. He says, seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he'll give you everything you need. Seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he's going to give you what you need. It doesn't say he's going to make you rich, but he says, hey, if you put me first, you're going to be satisfied in me, and I'm going to provide for you. See, a kingdom first life, what is that? A kingdom first life is a life that flows from a trust that Jesus is enough to satisfy. That Jesus is enough to satisfy no matter the circumstance that comes your way. That the purchase won't satisfy, that the upgrade won't satisfy. Yeah, they'll satisfy for a moment. But Jesus is the one who will satisfy for a lifetime into eternity. Now, I want to give you kind of a picture of what all of this looks like. I want you to walk away with an image of what all of this would be. And so I've set up an illustration with Jenga blocks, which of course is dangerous to do live, a Jenga block illustration, but I want to share with you something. This basket represents your income. This pile here represents your stuff. You already got a little nest egg started here. That's good. And this is trash, because eventually some of your stuff will become trash. And this is kingdom. This is kingdom first. So let's say, you're starting out, you're 20 years old, you own some things, and you start to make an income. Maybe you're 20, you're 25, and you're starting to make an income. And you say, hey, I'm going to put the kingdom first. I'm going to do that. So maybe you give to a local church now. Maybe you give to Connexus, which is fantastic. But this isn't about you giving to Connexus. Maybe it's Connexus, but maybe you give to Compassion. You sponsor a child who's in need. Or maybe you don't belong to our church, but you give to World Vision or something like that. Whatever it is, just think about this for a moment. You say, I'm going to give to the kingdom first. And then, there's some possessions I want. I need to upgrade my furniture at home, so I'm going to do that. And then you get another month's income, and you want to give to the kingdom first for sure. And then you say, but we had a car repair, and then I wanted to make sure I did that, and then we wanted to fix the roof on our house, so you want to do that. So you do that. Then the next month, you're going to be upgrading your house. You're moving to another house, and you're going to need a little more money to do that. You think, do we give our kingdom first, or maybe we don't? Now, Moving to a house is expensive, so we'll put a couple of months here, or maybe a couple of years, but you get the idea. And you say, yeah, but we are going to give to the kingdom first. And then you get the next month income, and this is that vacation you want to take, right? And the memories you want to have, and you kind of need some extra money for that, and so you decide, oh, I'm not sure we can give to the kingdom, but maybe we will. Then you have kids. Well, if you have kids, there's a lot of different upgrades and expenses there. You got cribs, and you got swings, and you got bumbos and toys you never even knew you needed. Then don't forget, the diapers and all that stuff. So you've got kids, and then those kids need bikes because they get older, and you got bikes, and you need to upgrade your garage door because it's broken to get those bikes in. And over the course of time, you start to build up your stuff. Now, then what happens is you realize there's some stuff you want, but the income isn't coming fast enough to get the stuff that you want as fast as you want it. And you realize something, that you can leverage some of the things you have down here to borrow money to buy the things up here. So the living room furniture set you have, you think, oh, I want to upgrade it, but we don't quite have the money. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on a line of credit. And I'd like to get a nicer car than we can actually afford. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow a little extra money to buy it's a bigger car payment, but I can borrow more, I can stretch out the payments, and then I can get the car that I want. Well, we're already in debt that way, so we might as well get the hot tub we want. And now what's happened is life's getting us a little more shaky. And the more debt we take on, the more anxious we get. But our tower's getting higher, isn't it? Now then what happens is we get to a certain point, and we've invested over the course of time in the kingdom, and we've invested in our stuff. And it's shaky because maybe we've taken on a whole bunch of debt that we can't handle. We're going to talk about some of that in the coming weeks. But then the kids move out, and the house is too big. And so it's time to downsize, and you've got that furniture that you downsize with, and you go to sell it, but nobody really wants it on Kijiji. None of the kids really want it, and we'll call it trash, but you send it to Goodwill because you want it to go somewhere. You loved it then, but now it's kind of out of date. In fact, there's a bunch of clothes you have that are sort of out of date, and they end up in the donate trash pile. And then your house is a bit big as well, as I said, and so you move to a condo. So now your life is kind of getting a little bit smaller, and maybe you're living on some of that, so you're putting it in the income pile. And then after the condo, you need to downsize again as you get older, and maybe it's a seniors facility or a retirement home, and you don't need any of that furniture anymore. And the truth is, most of it's outdated, so you're donating it or you're throwing it out. You don't really need the clothes you needed, and now you're in a smaller space than you were before. And over the course of time, you've built something. There's some wealth, but then one day we all die, the ultimate consumption. And what ends up happening is there's a bunch of stuff that people are going to clean out that will end up being thrown out. And then there'll be an inheritance. There'll be hopefully something for your kids that you can hang on to, that maybe you can pass on. And they're not really going to want everything, but they might want some of it. So we'll put some of it here, and then the money they'll take for sure, right? And this ends up being where you're at. All the stuff you accumulated all disappears. It rusts, it destroys, it ends up being in the trash, it ends up being donated. And you've left your life behind. Except you forgot one thing. What about what you gave to the kingdom in an ongoing way? What about the kingdom first mentality that you had? Well, let me tell you what happened. That child maybe that you sponsored in Guatemala and you helped them get the education that they needed, that allowed them to get the income that they needed to raise their kids, and their kids ended up being educated, and they ended up marrying, and their kids ended up being educated. All of a sudden, your investments over time have helped that entire legacy of that family. Or someone came to Christ here at Connexus. Leslie and I love this. We see somebody give their life to Jesus, and then what do? They end up marrying someone else who's given their life to Jesus. They raise their kids that way. Their kids grow up knowing Jesus. They end up raising their kids that way. And whatever you invested in the kingdom is multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. The kids' subscription boxes we send home, you give to Connexus, and we end up giving them to kids, and you've got a whole generation that grows up knowing Jesus. And maybe their kids do too. And all of that multiplies out. And see, what you don't realize is, well, you think you're building this. The kingdom of God can't rust. It can't be destroyed. It only multiplies. And what ends up happening is in eternity, you've built all this. And this doesn't rust. And this isn't destroyed. And this is what really matters. And this is what people with eyes of light can see. This is what the kingdom first means. Now, why is this so hard to do? I'll tell you why. Because it's easy to give God control of the things that you can't control, right? Your grandma has cancer. It's easy to give that to God. I have to golf with my buddies tomorrow. I need nice weather. It's easy to say, hey, God, give me nice weather. It's easy to give God all the things in our lives that are really out of our control. But it's hard to give him the things that you can, isn't it? And this is something that you feel like you can control. And Jesus isn't saying, hey, I want you to put me first with your possessions and your finances. He doesn't do that because he needs them. It's because he wants your heart satisfied in him. That's why this is important. He's saying contentment isn't found in consumption. It's found in Christ and in his kingdom. See, a consumption-first life, it's not that we can't own things, but a consumption-first life leaves you consumed in the end. Whether it's anxiety, whether it's workaholism, it consumes you when you're alive, or eventually the earth consumes you when you die. But a kingdom-first life not only creates contentment in your life, but in the end of the day, it leaves a legacy that will bring you joy into eternity. Let me pray for you. God, we come to you today, and we ask that as we look to reprioritize our lives, that you would speak to us as to where we need to put our treasure so that our heart will follow towards the things of your kingdom, so that we might find our satisfaction in you. God, I confess that at times I've looked to find satisfaction and contentment in things instead of the one who creates all things. And I pray you would continue to speak to us throughout this series about how to manage resources, manage funds, manage possessions in a way that puts the kingdom first. Because we know that when our resources point to you, that you leave us truly satisfied. And we pray this in your name. Amen.